Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Turnkey Kubernetes with Jenkins X, no assembly required. My name is Marites, and I'll be your moderator for today, together with my colleague, Bharat. I work on the marketing team here at Go2Group, and I'm excited to be hosting this session today. I am pleased to introduce our today's speaker, Mike Maheu. Mike is our Vice President of Service Delivery and Strategy and has been instrumental in introducing Agile and DevOps transformation as a service. Today, he's going to share how to build a scalable CI/CD solution for modern cloud-native applications on Kubernetes using the power of Jenkins X. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. So first, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session. We will send you the link afterwards. Next, we would love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have any questions during the session, please type them into the questions box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will bring them up after the presentation. We will have time for Q&A at the end. And last, we'd like to encourage you to share today's webinar with your social networks. So without any further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming Mike Maheu. Mike, over to you.
Thanks, Marites. And thanks for everybody for joining. Today's going to be quite a bit of information and a relatively short period of time, so we'll go ahead and get started pretty quickly. I'll be flipping back and forth between the slides and the actual tools and command lines and things like that we'll be working with during this presentation. So today's webinar, we're gonna basically do a general overview of the tools and the technologies that we're going to be using today. We're going to talk a little bit about Kubernetes and Helm and what they are. Then we're going to go into the command line and work with Kubernetes and Helm using the JX command line and some other command lines like kube control and even the Helm command line. And we're going to talk about cloud-based DevOps, and the cloud that we're going to be using today is Google Cloud. And then we're going to do an introduction to Jenkins X, and we're going to work and interact with Jenkins X and simulate creating Kubernetes cluster using the Jenkins command, even though we already have one, just to save some time, and then we'll work with that cluster. And then also we'll do some CI/CD examples with a real Java application using the Jenkins X command line and watching and monitoring our pipelines on the Jenkins and some of the other tooling that we'll have in the stack that comes with Jenkins X. And then after all that, we'll see how that all fits into the rest of the Agile process and the rest of the SDLC with other tooling and traceability and things in other products. So an overview, basically CloudBees, we're Go2Group and we're partners with CloudBees, and we provide professional services around DevOps and cloud DevOps strategies, and we even do managed services around DevOps and DevOps tooling. We also are partners with Atlassian and some other companies that we work with as far as their products that integrate with Jenkins, and we'll talk about that a little bit today as well. And we're going to basically use an example of today going from requirements to delivery. Obviously today with Kubernetes and everything, we're talking about the delivery aspect, but I'm gonna at the end kind of couple that together to how that marries with the Agile process and when a team gets requirements from product owners and how they start to sprint and then how they start to develop and how that basically blends in with a good CI/CD process. And then we'll talk about containers and how those work and how that speeds up the CI/CD and the delivery quality at a faster pace. And then we'll talk a little bit about public clouds and container management with Kubernetes, and we'll be going over the overall DevOps concepts throughout working with these different tools and how we can deliver value quickly and cloud native CI/CD with lots of automation. We're going to be working with that today during this hour. So the tools that we're going to be using are Jenkins, Kubernetes, Helm, Docker, GitHub, although you can use other ones like Bitbucket and GitLab, Google Cloud. You can also use AWS and Azure, Jenkins X, obviously, and Nexus. A lot of these tools come with the Jenkins X stack when you implement it. And when we start to do the development and kind of working with our example project, our code is going to be we're going to be interacting with GitHub to make changes to our code. Our builds are going to get kicked off automatically when we make changes, and the preview environments will get created, tests will be run, and Docker images will get created. And that's all based on Jenkins, Docker, and our Jenkins file, and we'll take a look at what that looks like. And then the staging deployment will happen whenever we do pull requests and merge those changes. And then finally, Helm will deploy our applications into containers onto the Kubernetes cluster. So it's basically what's going to happen as we start working with the tooling. So Jenkins X is an open source framework that CloudBees has come out with. It's fairly new, and it's quite it's basically like the title of the webinar. It allows us to quickly stand up a Kubernetes cluster and start working with CI/CD pipelines in Jenkins within just a few minutes. And these technologies are going to work their way up into the tool chain within CloudBees and within their other applications, as it's kind of like an open source incubator of technologies. So what Jenkins X does is it automates Jenkins CI/CD pipelines in the cloud. And again, it can be any cloud. A lot of companies are moving DevOps into the cloud. It's a lot faster. You can have dynamic environments, and you can basically create your infrastructure with code. It also allows us to rethink how developers should interact with CI/CD in the cloud and focus on making development teams productive through automation. That's important because we want our teams to focus on the code itself, and they really should be working and interacting with the code in the Git repositories and doing good code reviews and good test automation and all that stuff, and getting it committed into the repositories, and then let the automation do the CI/CD. So there's not a lot of configuration within Jenkins. There's not a lot of configuration and clicking around and creating new jobs. You're putting that all into a Jenkins file and letting that let the automation do the work. And that's what we're going to see today. Jenkins X is also open source, and they invite you to give feedback and to contribute to the project. What's the big deal about it? It's kind of a starting point in order. It helps you get into Kubernetes very quickly and see how it can work with the other tooling, specifically around CI and CD, and being able to dynamically create preview environments and different environments that are essentially hosting your application in real time, and they can be spun up and spun down or destroyed very quickly, much faster than virtual servers or virtual machines and other types of infrastructure. And it allows you to have each pull request and Git push with full CI/CD, complete with environments and promotion via GitOps. So we'll see how all that works, in just a few minutes here. So what's in the box with Jenkins X is you'll end up with a Jenkins master. Monocular will be installed, which is a way to view your Helm charts and the versions. We'll see how our Helm charts get versioned as we do builds and make changes and deploy to the environments. It also creates a Nexus artifact management repository. So as we do builds, it's going to version our artifacts and put them in the right places. And then it's going to use Helm to deploy the applications or to deploy the containers into the appropriate pods on the cluster. And then we're going to have GitHub hooks, webhooks, and command line actions as well. And this is all built in the minute you create the cluster. So with the Google Cloud, what we're going to do is we're going to create a project. We're going to, this is what you would have to do actually to get this to work on any machine. That will work on Mac, Windows, or Linux. It's based on standard things like Docker, the kube control library for Kubernetes, the Google, if you're going to use the Google Cloud, you'll use the Google SDK, and then you'll also need Helm installed in your machine. And there's plenty of documentation as to how to install all of these dependencies. So the first thing that you would do is when you're creating a cluster is you would use the command jx create cluster. In this case, I say jx create cluster GKE. That's specific to Google Kubernetes engine. There's also an AWS command, and there's a couple of other ones as well. I think Azure, and there's more of them being worked on. But essentially, it's going to create the entire cluster, the Kubernetes cluster, and it's going to spin up all of the pods with those applications that I just mentioned on that cluster, and it'll spin up Ingress, which will give it DNS, and you'll have an entire CI/CD system to work with just from that one command. So let's go ahead and start acting as if we just ran the JX create cluster for Google, and we'll start to interact a little bit with our cluster. And like I said, I'm going to kind of go back and forth between slide and terminal and things like that. So currently, right now, I'm actually in an application that is an example application that I created using Jenkins X. Not only does Jenkins X give you the cluster and all of the tooling, but it also gives you a command line interface to create Java applications, Go applications, Ruby applications. There's different basically instant starts or project skeletons that you can create. It's almost like creating a Spring Boot command from scratch, or I'm sorry, project from scratch. But in addition to that, when you create the application, and we'll see this shortly, it will create the application framework and the Jenkins file and the Docker file and the Helm chart. So it'll automatically put it into the pipeline. But right now, let's just take a look and see what we have on our cluster. So some of the commands, as you can see, if you just run the JX command, it's going to show you, the different types of parameters and things that you can pass into the command. There's quite a few of them. So one of the ones that we first want to look at is once you first install the cluster, is you can say JX get URLs, and it's going to pull down the different applications. So these are all the URLs to our tooling, essentially. So we have Jenkins, we have the chart museum that's running in a pod, we have the Monocular UI, which we'll look at, which is basically a user interface, a web user interface to look at the Helm chart versionings and how to install using Helm any of the applications that we're building and deploying. Also, there's a Nexus, like I said, Nexus artifact management repository. The other thing that we can do is we can say JX get pipelines and see our existing pipelines in the cluster. So we see that we have a lot of pipelines. There's several different applications. There's different preview environments. There's different branches. You can see all the different Git branches, whether they've built successfully or not. And then some of the other commands are get environments. So we can see that we have a dev, staging, and production environment. Those are their own pods, their own containers. And those environments, when you create the Jenkins X cluster, it also checks in the environment code to your Git repository. So you can actually make changes to your environments through code, through Git, and it will automatically change the structure of staging and production, for example, and for dev. You can also create new environments. We're going to be working mostly with dev and staging today because we're going to be using our CI/CD, and then when we push or promote or merge a pull request, then it will automatically move that to staging from a preview environment. And then another command that's noteworthy is get log, or say JX log. When I hit JX log, it'll ask me which log do I want to monitor. So during build time, I can actually monitor the Jenkins log as it's building its different applications as the CI/CD is running. That's an important one. So as we do kick off a build or a pipeline, we can go ahead and see that as well. And then lastly, not that these are all the commands, but these are the ones, some of the ones that we'll be using today, is we can say JX get previews, and this is going to show us any preview environments that we have open. And that would mean environments that currently have a pull request open. So if there's a pull request that's being reviewed, there'll be a preview environment. So not only can you do the code review and look at the code, but you can also look at what the application looks like in a temporary container, essentially. And we'll use that command as well today. So what we'll do is we're going to be going back and forth, like I said, between the slides, this terminal, and then also I just want to cover in general some of the, what these tools look like. So we saw that all the tools that are included in the framework and that are in the cluster. And so I also said that we're working with Google Cloud Platform. So with Google Cloud Platform, you basically create different projects. And our project today is called Modern Pipelines. And within that project, you can have different or multiple clusters. We have one cluster. When we did the JX create cluster command, it created a 3-node. It can be 3 to 5 nodes. It created a 3-node Kubernetes cluster and started to deploy all the different applications. So if we look at our clusters, we can see that we have our cluster here, given it the name Unicorn Translucent. And then if we go into our cluster, we can see details about that cluster, and then we can even see services. And so we can start to see the applications. These are all the pods that are running, and with the containers, their information, their URLs or IP addresses. And so as we interact with this cluster, this is what will essentially be that it will fill up different and create different pods and things in this environment. This is our Jenkins that we're working with. You can see that it automatically gives some DNS, and this DNS can be customized, but it gives DNS for each of the applications. So we'll be working with Jenkins, and we'll be using the Blue Ocean theme just to make things look nice. And then here's our monocular instance that shows us the versions of our different Helm charts in our applications. We're going to create a new application, and we're also going to work with our camp application that's already out there just to save time. Because if we start kicking off a lot of builds, we'll be waiting a little bit. We don't have a lot of time to wait today. And then here's the Nexus repository. Again, we'll be working with this camp application. You can see that we've done a lot of builds, and there's been a lot of coding done. So you can see how it's versioning and creating the artifacts in the environment. And then we'll make some changes to the application. This is all just the way that the application looks, and it's running in different places. This is actually running locally, so I can be changing my code inside of Eclipse and running locally and starting and stopping servers here. And just if I was doing local development on whatever branch. And then of course, when I start to interact with Git and make commits, then it would go into a different environment. And this is a preview environment that no longer exists, but we're going to create a PR number 5. And then after we do our merging our pull requests, then we'll end up in our staging environment. And so that's kind of how everything's going to work as a tooling stack with Jenkins X and everything that's included in it. And again, to get all of this, it was running that one command, which is JX create cluster, GKE for Google, and it essentially takes about 10 or 15 minutes. And most of that time is just the stuff spinning up on Google, which is why we're not going to do it now. But literally, it's once you have this stuff, the tools installed on your local machine, you can run this command. It's going to ask you for your Google credentials, for your cloud, for your account, and then it will start to install it. And literally in 10 minutes, you'll have this entire stack that we're going to be working with. So it's very quick and very powerful, and obviously very convenient to basically get on some DevOps best practices using containerization. So without further ado, let's see. We will pretend that we ran our JX create cluster commands. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention, so this is built on Kubernetes, so you still have Kubernetes or kube control commands, you still have Helm commands and all the normal stuff that you would have. So we can still, run kube control, get services, and we'll see that what our services, just like JX get URLs, but JX get URLs gets us our URLs, and this talks about, like a kube control command would give us the port numbers and things for the applications that are running in pods. So you can still run those commands, and then also see kube control namespaces. Oh, and the context. So if you're using something like local Minikube or you have multiple cloud environments, one neat thing that Jenkins X gives you is you can say JX context. And that's going to show me the same thing if I were to look up here in my Docker. If I look in Kubernetes, it shows me the different Kubernetes clusters that I have available to me. Minikube's not running right now, but if I had multiple Google ones, they would all show up here. So you can either switch context here with your Docker control, or you can switch them here just by saying JX context, and you can switch back and forth, and you can actually be working with multiple clusters at once. So just to make sure we're still on our cluster, we still are, and there we go. So the other thing that we can do with Jenkins X is we can create applications, like I mentioned earlier, and they can be different types of applications. So what we're going to do real quick is we're going to create an application using this command right now, and we will see how that creates the, like I said, kind of the project skeleton for basically a Spring Boot application that has actuator and web support in it, and then we'll see how that creates the repository in GitHub, and it creates the CI/CD pipeline automatically, and it actually will kick off a build. So let's go ahead and do that right now. And I'm actually going to create a new tab here so we can go into a different so we're going to say JX create Spring. We need web and actuator. And then it's going to ask us, is this Java, Groovy, or Kotlin? And we'll just give it a package. And we'll give it a an artifact name. Hopefully I don't have this already in my repo. And then yes, it'll ask you. So there's also credential storing happening with Kubernetes and Jenkins X, and so it's when I initially installed it, it asked me for my Git credentials, and so it basically has those as an environment variable, and it knows who I am. So it says, do you want to do this as yourself? If you had multiples, you could switch between different Git accounts. And so then it just asks me, do I want to create a new repository? Yes, I do. So it's creating a repository. And it just pushed everything out, created the Jenkins project. As you can see, it created a new job. And now it's monitoring it's giving me some commands. I can monitor the activity via the command line. I can get build logs like we talked about, or if I type in JX console, it's going to take me to just the Jenkins screen on the web in a web browser. And then again, we can get applications and get pipelines. But since we did that, since we created that or ran that command, you'll also see that I have an application in here called Backpack 1. And let me clear your screen here. And so you can see that it created the skeleton for a typical Spring Boot application. In addition to that, it gave me some Helm charts. It gave me a Jenkins file, and it gave me a Docker file. So this gives me a good starting place as far as Jenkins as far as my jobs and all that are concerned. And it's actually, like I said, it's deploying these things to containers. So we have containerization happening. And from here, I can monitor my Jenkins file. One of the things I might want to add is I want to notify Slack, about new builds or new commits and things like that, so I can add some lines into my Jenkins file around Slack notifications. Essentially, you're going to make any build configuration changes within the Jenkins file and not within clicking around in Jenkins. So if you go back to our browser and we look at our Jenkins environment here, we'll go to our pipelines, and you'll see that we have a new pipeline called Backpack 1, and it's already kicking off a first initial build based off the master branch. So again, we've already started CI/CD. All I did was run one command. I have a Java Spring Boot application. We're ready to start developing, and we're off to the races. And we can just basically, with our interaction with Git, it's going to be running our pipeline accordingly. And we can make changes by making modifications to our Jenkins file. So while this is building, we'll switch back over to our camp application, and I want to talk about how this kind of blends into the rest of the tooling and the rest of the enterprise when we think about typical SDLC environments for companies. So our camp application, if we take a quick look at it, and this is just like the Backpack 1 application that we just created. So this is again is a Spring Boot application. When we'll look at the environment that gets created for the Backpack 1 application, but essentially you get just a typical error page for a Spring Boot application, so that it's there's no code in there, so it's time to start coding. And for this example for camp, all we really did is we went into the application and we added some resources, an index page, so we can see something when we're working with our application. We added some style sheets and things like that to make it just look like a web application for demo purposes. So we're going to go ahead and make a change here as if we were working as a developer on a sprint team, working with Jenkins X as our DevOps platform, and take it from there. So one of the things that a lot of folks will be working with are other tools outside of the DevOps spectrum, like Jira, different agile process tools and things like that. So this is a Jira instance, and this is the whole point of this is to show how you can integrate with your other tools and still have traceability, and you're still doing DevOps, and you're still doing CI/CD, and you're using containerization, and you're doing all these best practices things. But you're not just isolated to that cloud or in that Kubernetes stack. This is a Jira instance that's somewhere else. And so we can go to our sprint board, and we can see that we have a story here that we need to work on called, it's the user portal menu editor. So we need to make some changes in order to work this item here. If we look at another item, so we closed MP1, which this work's already been completed, and we'll quickly look at this just to show that this is a story. We created one branch, so we have that traceability from the Git repositories. We're pulling in information into Jira. We can see that we had 3 code commits. We can see that we have a pull request that was reviewed and merged, and that's why this one's done. We can also see that we had all this build activity. So we're actually pulling information from the Jenkins that we have on our Kubernetes cluster into Jira, so they can see the activity that's happening during these builds. And that's all coming back to the story, this is all relevant to the story, including even the test cases that's using our Synapse product. So going back to our board, we're going to take this ticket here and we're going to start to work on it. So we're going to create a branch for our new ticket, which I think we already have one out here on Git. It's called Feature Menu Editor. So let's go to our terminal here, back to our camp app, and we're going to git fetch because I think we need to get that new branch. So there's our new branch. We're going to git check out our feature menu branch here. And so now we're ready to start developing. I'll just switch over here, and it says we're in the feature menu editor branch. And I think one thing we could change is the title, because this is no longer the Nostromo app. It's actually called Arizona. Well, it's the Arizona release, but we'll call it Arizona Camp. And so we'll go ahead and make this change. And so I'm just going to run the git commands here. We're going to git add, oops, git commit. And I'm just going to add the our Jira project that we're working with is Modern Pipelines 11. So I'm going to add the Modern Pipeline, or the MP111, sorry, issue ID, just to make sure that it shows that traceability in Jira for this code commit. And then we're going to push that up. So as soon as I push that up, if we go back to Jenkins, and our other application built successfully, so we can actually visit that one too, and we will in just a second. I'm kind of doing things in parallel just based on our time frame here. So we'll go back to our camp, and we can see that just because I made the change to the branch, it's creating this new build. So it's going to start building the feature menu editor change that we just did. And when it does that, as it builds it, it's going to create a preview environment, and we'll be able to see the difference between what's in staging, which is here. So you'll see that the title is still Nostromo. When we get to our preview environment, it'll change it to Arizona Camp, so we can just see the differences between the preview environment and the staging environment. And then what we'll do is we'll merge our pull requests after doing the code review, and then we'll see it go into the other environment. So back to Jenkins. So that looks like that completed. So what we want to do now is we want to go into our GitHub. And we'll go into pull requests, and it's going to say, yeah, hey, there's a pull request that you probably need to take care of. So here's our change right here. We can add comments and things like that. Also, if we go back to Jira, you'll notice that we have one commit here. And so now we'll, we'll go ahead and create our pull request. And this is the CI/CD happening in real time right here. And so now if we go back to our pipeline, you'll see now that our pull request has created a new build, and it's going to have a new preview environment called PR5. So it's actually going to deploy our application into a new Docker container, and it's going to be called, there'll be a URL to the preview environment, PR5. Once that's completed, if I run that command, JX get preview or get previews, I'll either get, basically get the URL to my preview environment. So we'll let that go ahead and build. And then if we go back to our Jira here, now you can see that we have a pull request. Oops, wrong one. I switched to the. You can see that we have a pull request, we have a code commit, and we have one branch. So that traceability is happening. And eventually when we get the builds, they'll come in here as well. Sometimes with the Jenkins integration with Jira, it's a third-party plugin. Go2Group is actually working on a new plugin that will be much better, but sometimes you have to refresh to get the thing to happen on the current one that I'm working with here. Let's just go back to our slides to make sure we're staying up to date. So just to review, we're working with Jenkins, we're working with GitHub. As we interacted with GitHub, we're doing our CI/CD, and builds are happening on Jenkins. It's deploying the artifacts to Nexus, as we'll see in a second when we go back and look at the artifacts. And then it's using Helm to deploy to the Kubernetes cluster, and using Docker as the containerization. So we created a branch. We did some development. We created a new issue in Jira to track our work, and then we committed the code to GitHub, and we watched our CI/CD happen. And then we're monitoring our pipeline. So we reviewed our pull request. We noticed the issue update. We didn't comment on our merge. And then we saw that the build kicked off, and then our app will now deploy to staging, and we'll see that in just a second. Okay. And so also, if we go back to our command line, we should be able to run the get apps command. And you'll see now we have an additional app called Backpack 1, which is our second Spring Boot application that we created. And actually, I'm going to go over here and run that same command just to show you that it's easier to click links here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this app. And like I said before, you're going to get that standard Spring Boot application error page. Now, if I were to add an index page to this application, just like we did with Camp, obviously then you would see an index page here. So but this application is ready to start working with and ready to start coding and running CI/CD on. And then our other application, let's see if we have our preview environment yet. So there's our new environment, our PR5 environment. So let's take a look at that. So here's our PR5. Remember, so you can see the title changed to the Arizona Camp. If we go back to our staging environment, it's still Nostromo because we haven't merged our pull requests yet. So you can see how that we're now we're going to do that code review, and we're going to take a look at, what does this preview environment look like? It looks like good. I see that you made your code changes, and now the title looks correct. So, hey, we all agree now we can merge our pull request, and let's do that now. I'll refresh this, and it's all good. And so we're going to go ahead and merge. And of course, that merge will also show up in Jira as it's updating because we want that traceability. So as you can see, just to recap, showing that requirements are going to come in from your requirements pipeline, your product owners, because DevOps is important, and containerization speeds up DevOps and precision and delivery and value fast, which is what we're trying to get to. But it also tightly couples with your agile process. If you were doing waterfall or some other kind of slow-paced development process, DevOps would be less important, or it'd be less viable, right? Because it'd be kind of like a bottleneck. You'd have the big bottleneck of process and bureaucracy and large requirements and things like that, but you have this really fast way of deployment. So it really takes both things to work together. And that's why I always bring that up. It's important to talk about how, we go from requirements to delivery. That's what makes delivery fast so important, is because you're also sprinting and you're iterating, every 2 weeks or whatever. So we did our pull request, our merge. And so here you can see that now it's going to do another build on the master branch, and it's going to update our staging environment automatically. So at some point when that's done, doing the deployment, we will see that our get rid of Backpack. Our staging environment is going to be updated with the new title, just as well as our preview environment. See if and then also we can see that our pull request was merged. And just to make it look legit here, we'll go ahead and we'll resync our Jenkins, which I'm not sure why that's happening, but it does. Refresh our job list. And then now you see our builds, and looks like there's a build that's still happening, which is our pull request build here. So and ideally, obviously, that would be syncing just as fast as the other sync is happening. So there's something that we need to fix there. traceability happening, and our build should be just about done. It looks like it's deploying now. So what about existing apps? If you have existing Java apps or whatever, there's a command for that. And what you would do is you would basically, you can read up the documentation about the import command, that you can say JX import, and you can give it to the URL to your Git repository for that project. You can also JX import from your local hard drive just by giving it the path to the application there. And it will then try to put that application in Git. But what it also does is it also generates the Docker file, it generates the Jenkins file, and it generates a Helm chart. So again, if you had an existing Spring application, Spring MVC or Spring Boot, or even I think it supports Ruby and some other languages, it would generate these things for you, and it would put your existing application into the CI/CD pipeline just in a matter of minutes. Which is quite powerful. So not only can you create new applications, you can also bring in your existing applications that you're coding into this platform. And then the pipeline will get created and an initial build will get kicked off. So JX import -- URL, that's the actual command, and then your Git repository. So let's check on our build real quick. Staging builds take a little bit longer than preview environments because there's more steps, there's more jobs that are happening. And by the way, if there are some unit tests happening. The unit tests are basically just doing a URL verification that the application is working. But obviously, you could use other test coverage and unit test tools like JUnit, TestNG, and you could be running other things as well, other tooling around that, SonarQube or whatever. And just refresh. All right, so we'll go ahead and go into the next phase before we start answering questions, because maybe it's changed already. It's still not deployed yet, so we'll check back just to make sure that's deployed and updated our title. But one of the things I wanted to mention, so Jenkins X is an awesome open source framework. I think of it kind of like as Fedora to Red Hat. They're developing awesome new technologies. This is a great way to get into Kubernetes and for the developers to interact with a Kubernetes cluster, for CI/CD and to be able to really interact with it from a developer's or a sprint team standpoint. When we talk about taking things to scale, we talk about other applications. Like I was saying, that the landscape is not just delivery and CI/CD. It's also your issue tracking system. It's also your traceability, your information radiators, how you're radiating information out to people that are not necessarily on the team. And that's one of the reasons why also, as an example, on our Jira instance, we have this dashboard to show, hey, this is like all the information about this team. This is the Modern Pipelines team. We see our Jenkins activity here. We see GitHub activity in there. We know we have 5 days left in our sprint. All of this data is coming back. These are metrics around this team and what they're doing and what they're sprinting and the development that they're doing. And that's important beyond that even. So we would think about enterprise metrics and traceability improvements with DevOptics, which is another cloud-based product, and then taking the features and some of the technology within Jenkins X to the next level at scale, which is Cloud-Bees Jenkins core product, which is Enterprise Cloud-Bees, which is basically built on Kubernetes, to where you can have a master of masters and an operations dashboard that shows you all of your Jenkins environments across the Kubernetes cluster or clusters and other environments. They can be in different places. And it allows you roles and group controls and more enterprise controls over the environments. And so that's why I look at Jenkins X as a starting point, especially it's easy point of entry, easy to get set up very quickly. You can even do it on Minikube if you don't want to, although Google Cloud has a $300 free worth of hours free when you sign up. But it's just a very low, easy to get into, so you can start messing around with these technologies and then really, implementing them on the enterprise at a scalable level. Just a quick look at DevOptics, because we saw how we had in Jira, we were looking at Jira, the Jira issue at the Jira issue level, but let's think about it at a scale of an enterprise. And here we can see that DevOptics is monitoring several masters, and it's showing you all of the activity across all of the Jenkins masters across the landscape, and where there are failures on database dev or the different types of projects and different modules within projects. And then also you can see here that it's also bringing in Jira information. So these are all the Jira tickets that are associated to stories, features, or bugs, and those are being pulled into DevOptics as well. So this is like at a larger scale, a metrics, a dashboard to view across your basically your SDLC landscape and how things are deploying and building and failing and passing, and how they interact and how they again come back to your requirements in your pipeline. So that's awesome. And that's CloudBees DevOptics. So I just wanted to bring that full circle back to some of the core products at CloudBees. Obviously, their enterprise platform, Jenkins Core, DevOptics for visibility and metrics, and then now they have also a support product that provides enterprise support around their products. And Go2Group, obviously, we are partners with them, and we help provide professional services and deliver all of these things from 0 to 60, requirements of delivery, best practices, coaching, DevOps in the cloud, managed services, and so on and beyond. So let's just see real quick if our build is completed, and yes, it has. And the magic moment, the title has changed, and we're good to go. We're in staging now, and now it's just a matter of everybody getting together and deciding whether they want to go to production. And I will wrap it up there, and we'll start off the Q&A.
All right, thanks, Mike. So now it's time for Q&A. So you can type your questions into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. So we have a first question here, Mike. Could you please share your thoughts on the key differences between Jenkins and Jenkins X?
So the key difference, there's really no difference between Jenkins X and Jenkins open source. The Jenkins that gets deployed to the cluster when you run the JX create cluster command is basically Jenkins open source, and it's the latest version. Now that's different than Jenkins Core, which, as I mentioned, is Jenkins Core is the enterprise product that allows you to monitor. It's basically a master of masters, and that's a scalable platform to where we're talking about having lots of masters on a Kubernetes cluster and basically managing them from an enterprise standpoint and being able to get the controls and metrics back. So that's kind of the differences between, but the Jenkins X Jenkins is exactly the same as Jenkins open source. It's just deployed into a container instead of onto possibly a VM or your laptop or whatever.
We have another question here. I have a .NET Core project, microservices. Does JX import works with .NET Core projects?
That's a good question. I would think, first of all, there is a community around Jenkins X. There's a Slack channel under the Kubernetes umbrella, and you can probably look that up. But they're developing. There's also a website with documentation, and they're developing new features all the time. I can't remember all of the languages and frameworks, but if you're using from experience, if it's a .NET Core application and you're using C# and you can build that, and maybe you're already building it on using Jenkins, I'm not sure, using .NET Build or whatever, it should work, and you could always run the command and see if it would work. But basically, you're going to like I said, you're going to say JX import -- URL, point it to the repository, it will certainly create your Jenkins file and everything. You may have to tweak the build a little bit when you get it into Jenkins, though, if you're having build failures.
Next question here. Can you use Jenkins X to build applications other than Kubernetes applications?
Yes, you're actually building Java applications, Ruby, Golang, I think maybe Node.js. There could be, like I said, there could be some other ones. So remember, Kubernetes is just it's a virtual cluster, and what Kubernetes is for is it's to manage Docker containers at scale. As you start to have more and more environments, you saw that I probably had 20 or 30 environments. If it was a big company, you could have thousands. And so Kubernetes is a way to manage all these containers. The containers could have any type of applications deployed into them. As you saw, we had Jenkins, we had our Camp app, Backpack app, Nexus, all of those things were deployed onto the cluster, again, in Docker containers.
Another question here. I need to make justification to my manager. From business perspective, what is the business value of Jenkins X in automating continuous everything for Kubernetes?
So if you look at the big picture and how things were integrated back into the other applications, but the bottom line is that it's, like I said, it's very low cost of entry. It's free. It enables you to get onto the Kubernetes cloud DevOps stack, if you will, rather quickly at low cost. And so one of the things we recommend a lot is we try to set up, a lot of companies are fragmented with tooling and they're kind of doing different, each development team is using different tools and using different techniques. So a lot of times Go2Group will come in and we'll kind of create a best practices scenario. And the whole point of it, again, is to speed up delivery and to improve precision and to be able to get value out to your customers faster. So if you're sprinting and you're doing a cadence of sprinting every 2 weeks and you're delivering production ready code, you're going to be a lot more precise and you're going to deliver more things faster, because as you're sprinting, you're doing that CI/CD in real time, and you're able to have constant environments, or also they're the same every time. Every time I did a code commit, it did a build, and it ran, potentially it would run all of our testing or test automation, and it would deploy it to a preview environment. That environment is the same every time. It's not going to environments that are maintained by ops people that can change, or they're patching operating systems. In these containers, all that's in that container is the stuff that your application needs to run, and it's the same every time. So there's that. That's where the precision comes in, and that's where the constant, expected results are 100% every time. And it just speeds things up. You're not messing around, tinkering with environments. It's all automated. It's all there, ready for you. It's also tracking everything. It's also versioning your artifacts. I mean, to have all that in just literally like 15 minutes is pretty amazing.
All right. I don't see any more questions from the audience. Before we end this session, you can catch Mike and the rest of Go2Group team at Jenkins World 2018 in San Francisco from September 17 to 19. All right. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending this webinar, and to Mike for sharing us this very important topic on Jenkins X and Kubernetes. So we hope to see you again in our upcoming webinars. Thank you, and have a good day.